Today's lesson is time zones, a cycle of problems and solutions. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And my name is Helen.
And today we're continuing to talk about time zones in the world. And of course, many of you are planning to travel in the future, to immigrate to another country, or to study in another country. So you need to be aware of different time zones. You might work in shipping as well, or you might do business and things like that with clients all over the world. So, of course, time zones are very important when you need to schedule a conference online. You need to be aware of what time it is in those other countries.
Yes, and from personal experience, I found that being aware of time zones is important when you travel because sometimes you might decide to buy a particular airplane ticket because it's very cheap, and then you find out that you actually get to your destination at 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning, and you have to wait there for a few hours before you can check into your hotel. So you might think, well, the flight takes 5 hours, which means if I leave at 2 in the afternoon, I'll get there at around 7 in the evening, but actually you're getting there at 3 in the morning. So you want to pay attention to time zones and time differences.
Indeed, it's very important in the modern world because we're running all over the place all the time, except during times of a pandemic, of course, we need to stay put. But time zones are pretty useful if we are traveling around the world. But we're talking about various problems that those time zones offer us, or at least that we have to experience. And, of course, last time we talked about the example of India and China. They're big countries. They should have maybe 4 or 5 time zones, but they only have one. So it's kind of confusing. If it's 8 o'clock in the morning in Beijing and everybody's getting up and going to work, well, if you're out in Lhasa in Tibet, well, it's still dark out, and the sun might not come up until 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, so that's going to be really, really weird. And the same case is in India as well. And we're going to talk about some other examples in today's lesson. So let's get to it. Let's listen to the first part of our lesson, and then we'll come back to discuss it.
Differences between clock time and solar time can lead to sleep and productivity issues. In Spain, for example, where clocks have been set to Central European time since World War II, body clocks are out of sync with the wall clock. As a result, many Spaniards lose nearly an hour of sleep a night. According to a 2013 report, Spain's time zone negatively affects productivity measures such as absenteeism, stress, work-related accidents, and school dropout rates.
各位好，第一部分我们看到名词 productivity 表示生产力或是生产率。例如 offering a 4-day work week could actually increase productivity. 一个礼拜工作4天的确能增加生产力。或者 staying up late and eating badly will lower your productivity at work. 熬夜及饮食不均衡会使你的工作生产力下降。另外补充这个字的形容词 productive。P-R-O-D-U-C-T-I-V-E productive 表示有生产力的或是有成效的，像是 Bruce had a productive day at work and managed to finish early. Bruce 今天工作很有效率，所以得以提早下班。或是 Donna was productive over the weekend as she cleaned her house and even went to the gym. Donna 这周末很有成果，因为她把房子整理干净，还去了健身房。再来我们看到单字 absenteeism， 这个字是名词，指旷工或是缺勤。举例来说 The company can't accept any absenteeism even if one has a reasonable excuse. 这家公司不接受任何缺勤，即使有合理的原因也一样。或是 Absenteeism is a behavior that your teacher may punish you for. 旷课是你老师可能会惩罚你的行为。接着我们看到名词 dropout， 指辍学者。例如 He was a high school dropout, so he was forced to accept lesser jobs. 他是个高中辍学生，所以他只找比较次要的工作。或是 Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were dropouts, but both of them were very successful. 贾伯斯和比尔盖茨都是辍学生， 但他们两位都非常成功。另外，把 drop 跟 out 分开，就变成了片语 drop out， 表示休学或是退出。像是 Jenny joked that she was going to drop out of school and join the circus. Jenny 开玩笑说她要辍学去加入马戏团。也可以说 After I dropped out of the dance class, I started taking a pottery class. 我不去上舞蹈课后，开始改上陶艺课。
Now, differences between clock time and solar time can lead to sleep and productivity issues. So here we're going to look at the difference between solar time, which is the time that is measured according to the position of the sun, and clock time, which is a time that can be determined by human decisions, by how we want to measure our time. So sometimes clock time does not go according to solar time. And when there is a difference between the two, this difference can lead to some problems related to our sleep pattern and productivity. Productivity is the rate at which we can produce goods when we work or get work done. So if we don't sleep enough and we feel tired and we feel like we're not going according to the normal patterns of day and night, that can affect our work, how we work, our productivity.
Yeah, so if you get up in the morning and it's still dark outside, you might not be very productive in the morning, and then you'll stay up very late because the sun won't set until like 11 or 12 at night, and you'll feel like, why should I go to bed? It's still light outside. Let's stay up and have a meal and have some fun. So, of course, those kinds of differences can have some issues regarding productivity. Productivity is one way to pronounce it. Other people say productivity. Both are acceptable. It just basically refers to how well you can produce things if you're working or if you're in school or whatever. So let's go back to Spain now. In Spain, for example, where clocks have been set to Central European time since World War II, body clocks are out of sync with the wall clock.
Right. So when we talk about the body clock, we're talking about the internal mechanism, the internal rhythm of our bodies when we feel tired, when we naturally want to go to sleep, and when we naturally wake up, when we naturally feel hungry and want to have breakfast, lunch, or dinner. So this natural rhythm is out of sync when it doesn't match up with the time on the wall clock. And this state of being out of sync can create a lot of problems. Being out of sync means to work at different times. So if one thing is out of sync with another, it means that it's not working at the same time as that other thing.
Exactly. They should be working at the same time with the same intervals and things like that. So the opposite, of course, is in sync, and out of sync means bad. One's flashing before the other. For example, they're out of sync. Hey, these lights are all out of sync. Get them to be in sync. Get them all to flash at the same time. So as a result, many Spaniards lose nearly an hour of sleep a night. Of course, a person from Spain is called a Spaniard, and as a result just means because of what we just talked about, then this is the result. So as a result of body clocks being out of sync with the wall clock, many Spaniards lose an hour of sleep at night because the sun is setting later, so they stay up later, and therefore they lose an hour of sleep. Although I suppose they could sleep in the morning, but the rest of Europe is working at an earlier hour, so the Spaniards need to get up too, even though it's probably still dark.
Yep, and this has serious results. According to a 2013 report, Spain's time zone negatively affects productivity measures such as absenteeism, stress, work-related accidents, and even school dropout rates. So the first problem, absenteeism, refers to the habit of not showing up for school or for work. And usually you don't have a good reason. It's just because you couldn't get up in time, or you missed the bus, or you felt lazy. So you have this habit of not going to meet your responsibilities, and this pattern is called absenteeism.
Exactly. So, yeah, because the sun sets later, the Spaniards might think, hey, let's stay up and have another bottle of sangria, or let's party until the sun actually does set. And then, of course, they're hung over in the morning and they can't get up. So they call in sick. So that's absenteeism. They don't show up for work. They'll also have some stress. Oh, gee, do I have to get up so early? I just had a lot of fun last night. And they also might have work-related accidents. They're tired, so they're not paying attention. And then they have school dropout rates. Dropout just refers to people leaving school at a younger age because they're not doing well in school. And yeah, that could account for the stereotype that a lot of Spaniards have of being kind of lazy and just saying, hey, I'll help you mañana, man. We're just going to have a party tonight, and watch the bullfights and stuff like that. So yeah, it might all be due to their time zone being so weird. If they had a good time zone, maybe the Spaniards would be more respected.
Or it could just be an excuse. So a good way to find out would be to change the time zone back and see if these problems still exist.
It would be an interesting solution there for the Spaniards and for other people in the world. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's talk about some problems that exist in India.
Similar problems exist in India. The country stretches 3,000 kilometers from east to west, spanning roughly 30 degrees of longitude. Consequently, the sun rises and sets around 2 hours earlier in the east than it does in the west. In the eastern state of Assam, the sun rises as early as 4:30 a.m. in summer and sets at about 4 p.m. in winter. These abnormal hours mean that residents of Assam spend a large number of daylight hours asleep and hours of darkness awake, at great economic cost.
第二部分我们看到单字 abnormal， 这个字是形容词，指异常的或是反常的。例如 The doctor detected an abnormal growth on David's liver. 医生查出 David 的肝脏有个不正常的增生物。或是Many animals exhibit abnormal behavior while in captivity. 许多被关起来展示的动物会做出异常的行为。最后我们看到单字 daylight， 这个字是名词，意思是白天或是日光。例如 You can't see much right now, but this area is beautiful in daylight. 虽然你现在看不出来，但这里白天的时候很漂亮。也可以说 The colors of the stained glass change in daylight. 在阳光下，彩绘玻璃的颜色会有所不同。
So we saw some of the problems that existed in Spain. Now let's look at some similar problems in India. The country stretches 3,000 kilometers from east to west, spanning roughly 30 degrees of longitude. So India, as you may know already, is a gigantic country spanning 3,000 kilometers from east to west. Still, they only have one time zone. And consequently, the sun rises and sets around 2 hours earlier in the east than it does in the west.
Indeed, so there's going to be people out of sync because of the difference in times regarding the sun rising and the sun setting. And in the eastern state of Assam, the sun rises as early as 4:30 a.m. in summer and sets at about 4 p.m. in the winter. That's pretty early for the sun to be setting. When I was growing up, of course, the sun set around 6 o'clock, but that was because I'm from a town that's quite far north and the days are shorter in the winter. But this is because of the time zone here. My goodness, the sun comes up so early. You've got to get out of bed, and then it sets at 4 p.m., and then you kind of have to force yourself to go to bed like at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and most people don't want to do that.
Yeah, that does seem very extreme. So these abnormal hours mean that residents of Assam spend a large number of daylight hours asleep and hours of darkness awake at great economic cost. So because these hours are abnormal, they are not normal, they are different from the norm. These abnormal hours mean that residents of Assam, residents are people who live in a specific place. So residents of Assam are people who live in Assam. These people spend a large number of daylight hours or hours during the day when there is light from the sun still shining. They spend these daylight hours sleeping. And when darkness comes, they are still awake. And the situation creates a lot of negatives for the economy. So this situation occurs at great economic cost.
Right, so if there's daylight, then you should be awake. You should be outside or working or whatever and being productive. And if it's dark outside, then you should be asleep. But if people are staying up really late, the lights are on, and they think it's daytime, but it's not really. They should actually be sleeping then. So, of course, this screws up their internal clock, basically. And, of course, it also screws up how society works. And that's why we're saying it's at great economic cost. So, economic means having to do with money and various systems in a society and how they work together. And, indeed, they won't be as productive if they're staying up so late at night and sleeping in the morning when the sun is out. They could be more productive, if they change the time zones instead of having just one all throughout India. And I suppose the same would be the case in good old China. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now to the third and final part. We'll listen first.
In recent years, there has been a push to restore Spain to the proper time zone. Similarly, groups in India have attempted to persuade the government to adopt a second time zone. Proponents believe these changes could result in better sleeping habits and boost worker productivity. Will it work? Only time will tell.
In recent years, there has been a push to restore Spain to the proper time zone. So because of the problems that we have described before, how Spaniards tend to not want to go to work in the mornings because of the messy schedule that they have. They might stay up very late and not be able to wake up in the morning, and there is a high dropout rate, and all of these social problems are attributed to the time zone that Spain is in. In recent years, there has been a push to restore Spain to the proper time zone. So restore Spain to the time zone that Great Britain and Portugal are in as well. To restore means to make a situation exist again. So before World War II, Spain was in the same time zone as the countries that are near Spain, and they are trying to restore Spain to that old time zone.
Yep, to restore, to try to return something to its original condition. That happens sometimes if people buy old houses that are kind of falling apart. They will spend a lot of money to restore those old houses so they look as good as new. And in Taiwan, of course, there have been efforts to restore various old buildings in many of the older areas of the country here, of Taiwan. But, of course, a lot of times it's just costs so much money to do that, and developers just want to go in there and tear those old houses down and build nice big luxury apartment complexes. So yeah, sometimes it's very expensive to restore old buildings, but in this particular case we're talking about restoring Spain to its original time zone. It did use a different time zone before World War II, and now there's been a move or a push to restore Spain to a proper time zone, one that's more reflective of its position on the map, to have the same time zone as Portugal and the United Kingdom. Similarly, groups in India have attempted to persuade the government to adopt a second time zone. So, yeah, if we've got some people active in India and they're saying, yeah, it's kind of weird that the east part of the country and the west part of the country have the same time zone, but the sun rises at different times. Maybe we could split India into 2 different time zones, or maybe even 3 or 4.
Yes, and proponents believe these changes could result in better sleeping habits and boost worker productivity. So we were saying before that these problems with the time zones are affecting productivity because people might be waking up too early, and by the time they get to work, it's already half the day has gone for them. So they're not going to work with full energy because they've been awake for 6 hours already. So these problems with the time zones really affect productivity. So proponents, people who support an idea, they support the idea of changing time zones or creating time zones in a country that has only one. They believe that these changes could result in better sleeping habits and boost worker productivity.
Will it work? Well, only time will tell. Interesting way to end the article there. Only time will tell, because that means we have to wait and see what's going to happen. Nobody really knows right now. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Let's listen to Hanny, our beloved Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第2部分写到，印度从东到西绵延3000公里，横跨大约30度经度，因此东部日升日落时间比西部早了大约2个小时。好，文中用到副词 consequently 来表达因此，那它的形容词就是去掉字尾 ly 变成 consequent。 我们来学习它的字首字根。首先 secu 或者是 sequ 或是 sue 这一类字根表示紧跟跟随，也就是 follow 的意思。像我们知道电影、书籍、戏剧等等的续集叫做 sequel sequel， 从这个就可以看出它字根的语义嘛。好，那么在 consequent 这个字当中，它的字首 con 表示共同一起，那么字根 sequ 表示跟随，ENT 是形容词字尾，一起跟随，跟着一起来，这样应该很容易联想到 consequent， 它表示随之而来的，随之发生的。我们顺便补充其他有这一类字根的单字。第一个是 subsequent， 好 subsequent， 它的字首 sub 表示接近或者是次于。好，字根 sequ 表示跟随， ENT 是形容词字尾，把它合在一起 subsequent 就表示随后的，后来的。那它的副词同样是把它加上 ly 变成 subsequently， 它表示随后紧接着的意思。好，第二个补充的是 pursue 这个字，字首 pur 是源自于 pro， 表示向前或是在什么之前，字根 sue 表示跟随。那同学们想象一下，目标就在前方嘛，那我们一直跟随着目标向前迈进，用这个画面去联想到 pursue 有追求、追寻的意思了。第三个补充的是 persecution， P-E-R-S-E-C-U-T-I-O-N。 好，它的字首 P-E-R 表示彻底，字根 S-E-C-U 表示跟随， T-I-O-N 是名词字尾。当某个人他一直如影随形跟在你后面，跟得很彻底，你是会觉得很不舒服、很困扰呢？用这样的方式去联想说 persecution 它有困扰或是迫害的意思。那像如果我们听到 religious persecution 就是表达宗教迫害咯。好，那么课文接着描述了印度东部的阿萨姆邦，夏天的太阳是在早上4点半升起，冬天大约是在下午4点落下，这意味着当地居民白天有很多时间在睡觉，天黑则是有很多时间醒着。好，文中它用到 resident 这个名词来表达居民、居住者，那这个字是来自动词 reside R-E-S-I-D-E。 那我们来拆解它的字首字根。R-E 这个字首表示以前、再度的意思，那么字根 S-I-D-E 它有 sit 就是坐的意思，从以前就一直待在那边，存在于某个地方。我们用这样的方式去联想说 reside 它有居住定居或是存在于什么什么的意思。那接着在 reside 后面接名词字尾 ENT， ENT 是说执行某事的人，所以我们就想嘛，执行居住、执行定居的人，这样应该就可以想到 resident 它是指居民住户了。好，以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Productivity. Computers have greatly increased productivity for office workers. Consequently, I forgot to set an alarm. Consequently, I was late to work. Abnormal. We had an abnormal amount of rainfall last night. Resident. Residents of this neighborhood are expected to keep their yards tidy. Economic. That country experienced a lot of economic growth last year. Restore. Wade plans to restore this classic car to its former glory.
Discussion Starter starts now!
Here's our discussion starter. The question is, do you think using a global system of time zones or using solar time makes more sense? Why?
Well, I think using solar time makes more sense because it's more uniform. All countries in the world can follow it, and that will just avoid problems that may arise when we have individual countries or continents decide their own time zones.
Well, problems such as worker productivity and people being tired at work and stuff like that can arise when we use different time zones and people use them in weird ways. So I think there should be some international standard. We should have a group of people getting together to decide what the time zones should be, and that makes more sense. Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoyed reading along with us. I am Roger.
I'm Helen.
See you next time.